March 6, 1953. The Soviet Union awakens to an unthinkable headline. Joseph Stalin is dead. The heart of the companion and brilliant continuer of Lenin's cause has stopped beating. That's how the official announcement began. To millions, it felt impossible. Stalin, the man whose image hung in every office, whose voice filled every radio, whose shadow touched every life, was gone. From every corner of the vast Soviet empire they came. Peasants, workers, soldiers, even school children, flooding toward Moscow in a human tide of grief. Tens of thousands spent nights at railway stations, shivering in the bitter wind, waiting for a chance to say goodbye. Journalists called it a living river of people's love and sorrow. But the capital was utterly unprepared. Moscow's narrow central streets, cordoned off by police trucks and military vehicles, soon turned into a death trap. Panic erupted. People fell. Others were crushed by the unstoppable crowd. By nightfall, hundreds, perhaps thousands, were dead. Yet not a single word of this appeared in the Soviet press. Not a whisper on the radio. The tragedy was erased before it could even be spoken. How did the funeral of one man turn into the mass death of others? Why did the country's new leaders stay silent? And what secret drove Nikita Khrushchev, 8 years later, to have Stalin's body quietly removed from Lenin's mausoleum under the cover of night? The official announcement of Stalin's death was broadcast early in the morning on March 6, 1953. At 6 a.m., the heart of Comrade Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, the wise leader and teacher of the Communist Party and the Soviet people, stopped beating. At the same time, state newspapers published a medical bulletin and official cause of death. But in reality, Stalin had died nearly 12 hours earlier, around 10 p.m. on March 5th, at his private dacha outside Moscow. By that evening, grief swept across the Soviet Union like a storm. National mourning was declared. Black flags appeared on government buildings. Shop windows were covered with dark cloth. Loudspeakers played funeral marches across cities and villages. Flowers piled up beneath Stalin's monuments. Everywhere, people wept. I was in school when the news came, recalls Vasily Bochkaryov, later a people's artist of Russia. Teachers were crying, some were sobbing. Everyone kept asking, how will we live now? What will we do without our father? I still remember the smell of valerian drops in every corridor. People were trembling. While the nation mourned, the party elite was already at work. That same night, an emergency meeting was held in the Kremlin. A government commission was formed to organize the funeral. It was led by Nikita Khrushchev, then the first secretary of the Moscow Party Committee, and included key figures of the Soviet hierarchy. Lazar Kaganovich, Nikolai Bulganin, Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky, and Lavrenti Beria, the feared head of the secret police. The commission worked fast. The funeral was scheduled for March 9th, and the place of farewell chosen, the column hall of the House of the Unions in central Moscow. Beria protested. He warned that the narrow streets around the building could not handle such crowds. He proposed placing Stalin's coffin by Lenin's mausoleum in Red Square, where there would be more space. But the others disagreed. Leaving Stalin under the open sky, even for a few days, was unthinkable. So they stayed with the traditional choice. The next morning, March 6th, Stalin's body was brought from his Kuntsevo dacha to the Botkin Hospital in Moscow. Under Beria's supervision, Kremlin doctors began the embalming, using the same method developed for Lenin nearly 30 years earlier. They even managed to smooth out the dark marks on Stalin's skin, making his face look younger, almost serene. He was dressed in his familiar khaki tunic, the one he had worn at parades and meetings, but adorned with insignia he had avoided in life. the golden shoulder boards of a Generalissimo, 2 hero stars, and bright gold buttons. Meanwhile, workers rushed to alter Lenin's mausoleum, carving Stalin's name beneath Lenin's on the red marble facade. He would be laid beside his predecessor, a symbol of eternal continuity. By the evening of March 6th, Stalin's body lay in state in the column hall of the House of the Unions, a grand marble room in the heart of Moscow, transformed into a cathedral of grief. The chandeliers were draped in black crepe. The columns were wrapped with the coats of arms of the Soviet republics. Dark mourning banners covered the walls. Behind a curtain, a symphony orchestra played Beethoven, slow, heavy, eternal. The nation's highest leaders, Beria, Malenkov, Khrushchev, Molotov, took turns standing guard by the coffin. To many, it seemed as if time itself had stopped. At 6 p.m., the doors finally opened for the public. The first groups entered quietly, heads bowed, tears streaming down faces hardened by decades of struggle and fear. But outside, beyond the marble walls, a nightmare was unfolding. Tens of thousands had already gathered near the city center. People came not only from Moscow, but from distant villages and garrisons, traveling for days through snow and cold. By now, the temperature had dropped to minus 12 degrees Celsius, sinking to minus 18 by dawn. Still, the human tide kept growing. Authorities had tried to restrict access, only allowing official delegations and workers with special passes. But people came anyway, desperate to be part of history, or perhaps afraid not to be. No one wanted to be seen as indifferent to Stalin's death. The main path to the column hall began at Chistya Prudy, ran along Myasnitskaya Street, and ended at Dzerzhinsky Square. But barricades, army trucks, and tanks blocked many of the streets. The crowd was forced to take detours, doubling back through narrow boulevards and side alleys. By 7 p.m., the line stretched for miles, from the House of the Unions all the way to Belorusky Station. There were no barriers, no clear directions, no control, only a sea of people, silent, frozen, and pressing forward. Then, somewhere near Trubnaya Square, the flow stopped. A narrow passageway was blocked by trucks. But the mass behind kept pushing, unaware of what lay ahead. The front rows began to collapse. People screamed. The crowd didn't stop. Bodies fell, were trampled, crushed against walls and lampposts. Children disappeared in the chaos. Mothers tried to hold them up, only to be dragged down themselves. Poet Yevgeny Yevtushenko would later recall, "At the corner where the School of Modern Drama stands today, I saw people pressed to death against a traffic light. In some places you had to lift your feet because you were walking on bodies." The dead were carried away to Lefortovo morgue, but soon there was no space left. Bodies lay in the snow. Doctors worked silently, their hands trembling with exhaustion. No one knows the true number of victims. Some say hundreds, others more than 1,000. Unofficially, it might have been worse than the Kodinka tragedy of 1896, when over 1,300 people died during the coronation of Tsar Nicholas II. Yet in 1953, not a single newspaper line mentioned the disaster. No radio broadcast, no official mourning for the dead of Trubnaya Square. They were erased, victims of devotion and fear alike. Even when the doors of the column hall closed for the night, the crowds did not leave. People slept on the icy streets, afraid to lose their place in line. By morning, some never woke up. Meanwhile, inside the Kremlin, there was little concern. According to General Ivan Serov, the man in charge of maintaining order, reports of the casualties didn't seem to move Beria or Khrushchev. Instead of opening new passages or easing the crowd, They called in Komsomol volunteers, mounted police, and soldiers to restore discipline. That only made the panic worse. Even Vasily Stalin, the dictator's son, was reportedly outraged after witnessing the crush. He argued with Khrushchev and Beria, accusing them of killing innocent people during his father's farewell. But his anger changed nothing. On March 7th, access to the column hall was cut off completely for ordinary citizens. Only foreign delegations, diplomats, and officials were allowed in. Still, thousands stood outside, freezing and waiting, hoping that the doors might open again. They finally did, briefly, on March 8th. But this time the route was redirected through Chekhov Street. Narrow, uneven, and completely unsuitable for such crowds. Again, panic. Again, screams. And again, silence from the state. The exact number of victims remains unknown to this day. Officially, only a few dozen were mentioned. Never publicly, always in whispers. Unofficial estimates range from 800 to 1,500 dead. Some historians believe the true toll may have been even higher. For 3 days, the capital of the Soviet Union became a graveyard of the living, a place where grief, fear, and devotion merged into a single, suffocating crowd. And through it all, the propaganda machine kept rolling, broadcasting speeches, playing funeral marches, insisting that the people's love for Stalin knows no limits. 500,000 people passed through the House of the Unions to say goodbye. Countless others never made it inside. They died on the streets of Moscow, their deaths buried under silence. March 9th, 1953. The Soviet Union is at a standstill. Factories have stopped, schools are closed, and the streets of Moscow are buried under a silence that feels unreal. The day has come to bury Joseph Stalin. At 9 in the morning, the coffin is lifted onto shoulders by Kremlin guards in white gloves. A funeral march plays as the leaders follow behind. Beria, Malenkov, Molotov, Khrushchev. None speaks. Their faces are pale, their eyes fixed ahead. The procession moves slowly through Moscow's central streets towards Red Square. Helicopters circle above. Loudspeakers broadcast sad music from every corner. On balconies and rooftops, people watch in tears. Some bow, some cross themselves in secret. At the mausoleum, a black banner hangs beside Lenin's name. For the first and last time, two leaders will rest side by side. As the coffin arrives, the music stops. Only the wind and the distant echo of a clock can be heard. Marshal Vasilievsky reads the farewell speech. Then Malenkov steps forward to speak on behalf of the party. The great heart of Comrade Stalin, our teacher and guide, has ceased to beat. But his cause, his ideas, and his glory will live forever in the hearts of the Soviet people. The crowd answers with a roar that shakes the square. Flowers rain down from windows. People shout, "Glory to Stalin, glory forever!" Some fall to their knees in the snow. And then, amid the cheers and the weeping, the moment comes. The coffin is lowered into the mausoleum beside Lenin. The doors close with a dull final thud. The reign of Stalin, the man who ruled for almost 3 decades, is over. But inside the Kremlin, the struggle for power has already begun. In the weeks after the funeral, the country is ruled not by one man, but by a fragile trio: Beria, Malenkov, and Khrushchev. Beria moves fast. He releases thousands from the gulag, halts tortures in prisons, and orders an end to some show trials. But his motives are not mercy. They're control. Khrushchev watches closely, quietly building alliances inside the party. By summer, the balance shifts. At a meeting of the Presidium, Beria is suddenly arrested, right there in the Kremlin. Within months, he is executed in secret. Khrushchev emerges as the new master of the Soviet Union. 3 years later, he does the unthinkable. Behind closed doors at the 20th Congress, Khrushchev delivers a speech that will shake the world. "Comrades, we must condemn the cult of personality and its terrible consequences. Stalin committed grave crimes against our people." The room falls silent. For the first time, the Soviet Union hears the truth, or part of it. A new era begins. De-Stalinization. In 1961, 8 years after Stalin's death, another secret operation takes place. Under cover of darkness, Khrushchev orders Stalin's body removed from Lenin's mausoleum. No announcement, no ceremony. Workers chisel away his name from the marble facade. At dawn, a small group of soldiers carries the coffin to a quiet spot behind the mausoleum wall, among other Soviet leaders, away from Lenin's side. A simple plaque is set in stone. IV Stalin, 1879-1953. No speeches, no crowd, no flowers. The man once worshipped as a god now lies in the shadows of the Kremlin walls, forgotten by the state he built. Time has washed away the songs, the parades, and the tears. But the story of that March week in 1953, the grief, the fear, the silence, still haunts the corridors of Soviet history. Because in the end, the death of Stalin was not just the end of a man. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Every empire leaves its secrets behind. Some are buried deep, others are still whispered in the cold air of Red Square. 2 decades later, the Soviet dream still breathes. In the soft haze of the 70s, life goes on, steady, ordinary, almost peaceful. Factories roar again, new leaders rise, portraits change, parades return. But the shadow of Joseph Stalin never truly disappears. For millions, he remains the father of victory, the man who defeated Hitler, built superpower status, sent rockets into space. His image still hangs in old veterans' homes, next to medals polished every May 9th. Yet for others, Stalin is a ghost that never stopped haunting the Soviet soul. The man who built his empire on fear, who filled the gulag, who ordered the disappearance of friends, poets, generals. In school books, his story was rewritten, softened, rephrased, never fully erased. Teachers called him a complicated figure. Children recited his name without knowing the cost behind it. In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapses, the world seems ready to move on. Statues fall, streets are renamed. For the first time, archives open, and the truth spills out like cold light through a cracked door. Letters from prisoners, secret orders for executions, lists of names, each one a life broken by the man once called the father of nations. Yet even then, Stalin's story refuses to die. Today, decades after his death, the question still divides the country. For some, Stalin is a tyrant. For others, a hero who brought order and strength. Polls show his approval rising again. In some towns, his busts reappear in public squares. His face returns to banners on Victory Day. Why? Maybe because Stalin represents something deeper. A longing for certainty in times of chaos, for strength when the world feels unstable, and for pride when the past feels greater than the present. History, after all, is never just about facts. It's about memory. And memory, like power, is never neutral. 70 years have passed since that cold March morning when Stalin's heart stopped beating. The songs of mourning have faded, but the silence that followed still echoes. The crowds are gone, the banners are gone. But beneath the Kremlin walls, under a simple stone, the ghost of the father still lies. Not worshipped, not forgotten, just waiting. In every nation's story, there comes a moment when truth and myth meet face to face. The death of Stalin was one of those moments, when a god fell and a people began to wake.